Let's talk Twitter just for a second, because they're going to stop declaring what their monthly active users are, which seems to be an interesting thing. They're lower year over year in terms of monthly active users, and they're projecting sort of lighter guidance in large part because they're going to have higher expenses to deal with all of the, it's a Yiddish word, mishigas going on.
Right.
Is that a problem?
Yeah, I mean, they have basically a little over 300 million monthly users. That's not a large number. I mean, compared to 2.2 billion Facebook users total,
right.
And monthly is a little less than that. And they have problem. How do you advertise on Twitter? And they don't have the advertising revenue that the Facebooks and the Googles and the Amazons increasingly have.
Were you surprised, by the way, on Facebook, just how strong that business has remained despite all of the hand-wringing and conversation that we have about what's going to happen in Washington, all of the anxiety about privacy, the issues around the election, everything else?
Yes, but they have a problem. I mean, if you gave a truth serum to Mark Zuckerberg or Sheryl Sandberg, they would tell you they're sweating about the following. What is the government going to do? Not just about privacy, but about our size and our dominance. Is there going to be some antitrust issues, and it need not be a breakup of Facebook. It could be, you can't buy.
Can I just ask you a very serious question about that? With the current administration in place, do you think that will happen? Plus, you could argue the consumer, the American public, has already voted. They voted with their click every single day by staying on the platform. I would have thought, if people thought that this was so horrific, what was happening, and this is not a defense of what's happened to Facebook from any kind of moral standpoint, but you would have thought that they wouldn't be using the service.
Would have, and I agree with that. And the but is that privacy is a burgeoning issue in America, as it's much more dominant in, say, Western Europe. And the issue of size. And the American public has an aversion to bigness. And Facebook and Google and Amazon are big.
Oh, come 2020, if there's a true change in Washington, I could see all of this being. But you think in the next 2 years this is still a real conversation?
I think Republicans talk, as do Democrats, about privacy issues, and they talk about size issues. So I think it's a bipartisan. It's one of the few areas where there's an overlap.
The thing about Facebook, though, is that it did see a user decline in the quarter. The revenue per user was right. But the fact that advertising revenue remains strong, maybe that plays into the case that it is too big, because people are making the argument that there is nowhere else to go, that you've got to go there. And so it plays right into that antitrust movement against Facebook.
To build on your point, which I agree with, think about the newspapers and magazines and the people in the media world who are increasingly lining up against Google and Facebook, saying they are 70% of all the digital ad dollars are going to them, and almost about 90% of all the growth in digital ad dollars are going to them. And why did Vice lay off people? Why did Huffington Post? Why did these companies lay off people? BuzzFeed. Because they can't get the advertising dollars.
I think it's important to remember that, yes, these are significant issues, but from a security selection standpoint, that's built into the price. If it wasn't for that, Facebook would be significantly, the valuation would have been significantly better. So, yes, these risks are real, but they are built into the price, and therefore they're still a good company.
I think the depression in the valuation reflects that concern. But do you really believe that it's fully? Because if you give truth serum to Sheryl Sandberg or Mark Zuckerberg and you said, tell me how much you need to spend to come into government compliance, the fact that they don't even know what the government might or might not do is a huge issue. How do you build that into a model? Analysts seem to be very, very comfortable with it at this point. From the reaction to the last quarter's conference call, investors seem to be much, much more confident in general, but we don't know what's built into the price or what needs to still be built into the price.
So yes, is there going to be significant amount of spend or with respect to all of this? The answer is yes. But even with that spend, if you look at their overall growth trajectory, and not just in the U.S., but on a global basis, I think that is just mind-boggling, and the valuations, therefore, in our view, are quite interesting.
There's no disagreement that they're, as a business, they're doing great, as are the other giants in Silicon Valley. I'm just talking about, if you look over the ridge, they've got problems coming up there. China, for instance.
Ken, what do you make of the fact that you just mentioned it, that the likes of BuzzFeed and Huffington Post have made cuts, but the likes of New York Times yesterday reporting very good numbers? Does that suggest the traditional newspaper-type companies have sorted out their digital strategy now?
No, the Times has, and the Times is doing well. The Times is the best newspaper in the world. So the Times does well, the Washington Post does well, Wall Street Journal, The Economist, the New Yorker does well digitally. Detroit News, St. Louis Post-Dispatch, New Orleans Picayune Times, local newspapers are dying. And 500 newspapers have died since 2006. But increasingly, they're getting together. And Murdoch has been a leader in this. NBC, Brian Roberts. You guys have to compensate traditional media for like cable compensates the networks, and that's another argument that's building.